I am not my borderline personality disorder. I am more than my diagnosis, even if it doesn't always feel that way. Borderline personality disorder feels like I'm always on the edge, caught between two realities that don't quite align. It's hard to explain BPD to people who don't understand the constant shifting between intense love and intense fear. Living with borderline personality disorder feels like I'm walking on a tightrope, balancing emotions that can tip at any moment. I wish I could control my emotions, but BPD makes it feel like they control me. Borderline personality disorder is like living in a storm where everything is swirling around and I can't find a way to calm it. The worst part of borderline personality disorder is feeling like you're too much for people to handle and not enough at the same time. BPD makes me feel like I'm never sure of who I am, constantly shifting between different versions of myself. With borderline personality disorder, my emotions can feel like a tidal wave, powerful and overwhelming, drowning everything in its path. BPD isn't about being difficult, it's about feeling everything deeply all the time and not knowing how to manage it. The world feels like it's too much for me to take, but I feel guilty for needing to step back from it. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel calm and stable, or if my emotions will always feel like a roller coaster. Borderline personality disorder isn't just about mood swings, it's about feeling like you're trapped in a constant emotional battle with yourself. It's exhausting trying to explain to people that my reactions aren't always rational, but they feel completely real to me. Living with borderline personality disorder means walking through life feeling like you're one step away from losing control. I feel everything too much. It's like being on a constant emotional overload. Borderline personality disorder is like my heart is constantly in a tug of war between wanting love and fearing rejection. The worst part of having BPD is the fear of abandonment, even when no one is leaving. Sometimes I feel like I'm walking around in a fog of confusion, unsure of who I really am. People with borderline personality disorder don't want to push others away, we just don't know how to control the chaos inside. BPD is not about being dramatic, it's about feeling things so intensely that it can feel like life or death. The highs feel so high and the lows feel so low, and there's no middle ground in between. Having borderline personality disorder is like living in a constant state of emotional whiplash, up and down, back and forth. Sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, my emotions will always be too much for me to handle. With BPD, it's like I'm wearing a mask, pretending to be okay while my emotions are unraveling inside. Borderline personality disorder is exhausting because every interaction feels like it could either be a moment of connection or rejection. BPD makes me feel like I'm always standing on the edge of something, waiting for it all to fall apart. I have these intense feelings, but I often don't know where they're coming from or why they're there. BPD makes me push people away just as much as I need them to stay close, and that's the most painful part. With borderline personality disorder, I don't know how to live without fear of it slipping away. It feels too fragile, too dangerous. Living with BPD is like trying to find my place in the world when I don't even understand who I am. People with BPD don't want to be alone, we just don't know how to handle the closeness when we get it. Sometimes I feel like a stranger in my own body, unsure of what to feel or how to act. Borderline personality disorder is not just about mood swings, it's about feeling like you're constantly on the edge of a breakdown. My emotions are like waves, they crash over me and I have no control over when they'll hit. Borderline personality disorder doesn't just affect my relationships with others, it's also a constant battle with my own mind. When I feel abandoned, even the smallest sign can set off a spiral that feels like the end of the world. Borderline personality disorder makes me feel like I'm stuck in a loop of self-doubt, questioning who I am and whether anyone truly cares. The hardest part of BPD is that I want love and affection so badly, but I fear it more than anything. Living with borderline personality disorder means living in extremes. Nothing is ever balanced, everything is all or nothing. My emotions don't have a middle ground, it's either all-consuming or barely there. Having BPD feels like I'm carrying a storm inside me and every day I'm trying to hold it back. Sometimes it feels like no one understands how deeply I feel everything, even the smallest things. BPD is about constantly trying to make sense of the confusion and chaos in my mind. When I love someone, it feels like I'm drowning in it, but when they leave, it feels like I'm suffocating in the emptiness. The emptiness I feel from borderline personality disorder is often louder than any other feeling. It's like a void that can never be filled. I don't want to push people away, but my fear of being hurt makes me do it anyway. With BPD, I struggle with finding my identity, constantly feeling like I don't know who I am. It's hard to know who I can trust when my mind tells me everyone will leave me eventually. Sometimes my emotions feel so overpowering that I can't make sense of them. They just are, and they take over. Having borderline personality disorder means having a heart that loves deeply, but a mind that is constantly second-guessing everything. I live in constant fear of rejection, and it makes it hard to form meaningful connections with others. BPD makes me feel like I'm constantly on the edge of losing control, never knowing when the next emotional crash will come. I feel like I'm constantly being pulled between the desire for closeness and the fear of it. Borderline personality disorder doesn't just affect my relationships with others, it also affects the relationship I have with myself. Sometimes I feel like I'm watching my life unfold from a distance, disconnected from everything around me. With BPD, it's hard to believe in the stability of anything, especially my own emotions. Borderline personality disorder is a battle between wanting love and pushing it away because you fear it will hurt too much. I'm afraid that if I let myself love someone fully, I'll lose them, and that fear keeps me from truly connecting. I don't know how to make sense of my emotions, and that leaves me feeling lost and misunderstood. BPD can make me feel like I'm going crazy, but I'm just trying to survive the constant emotional turbulence. It's not that I want to hurt people, but BPD sometimes make me react impulsively without thinking. Borderline personality disorder is living with an emotional volcano constantly erupting and then quietly simmering down only to erupt again. The hardest part about BPD is feeling like I'm too much for people to handle and not enough to keep them interested. With borderline personality disorder, every little thing can feel like a huge deal, and it's exhausting trying to manage those emotions. Living with borderline personality disorder is like feeling everything too intensely without any control over when it will all calm down. Sometimes I feel like I'm caught in a whirlwind of emotion and I can't seem to stop it. Borderline personality disorder is like living with an emotional roller coaster that never stops and I can't get off. My fear of abandonment makes me cling to people, but at the same time I push them away to avoid getting hurt. BPD makes me feel like I'm constantly walking on a tightrope, always afraid of falling. BPD is like living in a house made of glass. It's fragile, and one small impact can shatter everything. Sometimes I feel so much, and at other times I feel absolutely nothing, and neither extreme is comfortable. BPD means loving someone with all of your heart, but fearing them leaving with just as much intensity. It's hard to explain borderline personality disorder to others, especially when I can't always explain it to myself. With BPD, the world feels incredibly sharp one moment and dull the next. I often feel like I'm drowning in my own emotions, unable to breathe or escape. The emptiness I feel with BPD is like a hole that nothing seems to fill, no matter how hard I try. Borderline personality disorder makes me question everything, my relationships, my emotions, even my own worth. Living with BPD is like constantly swimming against the current, trying to stay afloat. Borderline personality disorder is a silent battle, and on the outside it might look fine, but inside it's a storm. I often feel like I'm both too much and not enough, like I don't fit anywhere. BPD is about being stuck between extremes, never able to find a middle ground. I don't want to be a burden, but borderline personality disorder makes me feel like I am. Sometimes I feel like I'm chasing love that always seems just out of reach, but I'm terrified of actually getting it. Borderline personality disorder means feeling like a stranger in your own skin, constantly searching for something that feels real. The hardest part of BPD is the constant fear that everyone will leave, even when they've never given me a reason to believe that. I live with an emotional intensity that feels like it's too much to handle even for me. Borderline personality disorder is about never quite feeling at home in your own life, like you're always on the outside looking in. The feelings of emptiness I experience with BPD are so deep it feels like nothing can fill the void. Borderline personality disorder makes me feel like I'm constantly chasing after validation because I don't believe in my own worth. With borderline personality disorder, it's hard to believe in stability because emotions can change so suddenly and intensely. BPD means sometimes feeling everything all at once and other times nothing at all. The fear of abandonment is the loudest voice in my head even when there's no reason to be afraid. It's difficult to trust others when my own emotions can change so quickly and unpredictably. Borderline personality disorder is about the constant fear that no matter what I do, I'm going to be left behind. Living with BPD is like being on a constant emotional tightrope, unsure of whether I'll make it to the other side. I push people away because I'm scared they'll leave me, but then I feel abandoned and alone. BPD is exhausting. It's like my emotions are always running at full speed and I can never catch up. I don't always understand my emotions, and that makes me feel like I'm living in chaos. Borderline personality disorder is like having a heart that loves deeply but a mind that doubts and fears love at every turn. Living with BPD means constantly battling between wanting connection and pushing people away out of fear. My mood can flip so quickly it's like being in a car that suddenly swerves without warning. BPD makes me feel like I'm walking on eggshells, afraid of breaking myself or others with my emotions. It's hard to explain to people that I'm not overreacting, I'm just feeling everything more intensely than they can imagine. Sometimes my emotions feel like an overwhelming tidal wave and I can't stop it from crashing over me. With BPD, I often feel like I'm trapped inside my own mind trying to make sense of the emotional chaos. Living with borderline personality disorder feels like being pulled in multiple directions. One part of me craves stability and the other fears it. BPD is about loving too deeply but fearing that love will destroy me in the end. I feel like I'm constantly running from the possibility of hurt, but I can never fully escape it. The pain of BPD is not always visible, but it's always there, quietly suffocating me. I feel like my mind is at war with itself, constantly pulling me in different directions. With borderline personality disorder, it feels like I'm living in a world where everything is black and white, even when I know there should be gray. I'm terrified of being hurt, but I also crave love more than anything, and that battle inside me is exhausting. Sometimes it feels like I'm constantly floating, never quite touching the ground, unsure of where I stand. BPD is exhausting because every emotion feels like a crisis, even when it doesn't make sense to others. I struggle with borderline personality disorder because I feel like I'm always running after something, but I can't quite catch it. BPD makes me feel like I'm constantly walking on a razor's edge, afraid I'll fall at any moment. I want to trust people, but my fear of abandonment keeps me from letting anyone in. BPD is about feeling everything too much, but not knowing how to express it in a way that others can understand. I feel like I'm constantly being torn between my desire for closeness and my fear of being hurt. It's hard to find stability when my emotions feel like they're constantly shifting. Borderline personality disorder is about trying to make sense of emotional turmoil, but others can't always see or understand. Living with BPD is like holding on to a thread that feels like it might snap at any moment. The hardest part of BPD is the inability to control the intense emotions that come out of nowhere. Borderline personality disorder makes me feel like I'm on the outside of my own life, trying to find my way back. With BPD, I often feel like I'm stuck in a cycle of emotional highs and lows with no escape in sight. I push people away because I don't know how to manage my emotions and I fear they'll leave anyway. BPD is about feeling so deeply and yet never feeling truly seen or understood. When you have borderline personality disorder, it's hard to know if the love you feel is real or just a desperate need for validation. I feel like I'm constantly trying to keep myself from falling apart, but I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Borderline personality disorder makes me feel like I'm stuck in a room filled with mirrors, constantly seeing myself through different lenses. Living with BPD is like being trapped in an emotional storm with no clear way out. I don't know how to feel calm when my emotions feel so overwhelming and uncontrollable. BPD makes it difficult to believe that anyone could ever truly care about me for who I am. I want to be loved and accepted, but I'm terrified of getting hurt and being abandoned. With the borderline personality disorder, the smallest thing can feel like the biggest catastrophe, and I don't know how to stop it. BPD is about living with a constant push-pull between needing connection and fearing it. Sometimes I feel like I'm living a life I can't fully control and emotions that are always out of my reach. BPD means constantly questioning whether what I'm feeling is real or just a reaction to the fear of being hurt. Living with BPD is like walking through a life in a fog. Everything is unclear and I don't know where I'm going. Borderline personality disorder makes it feel like my emotions are a floodgate that I can't close no matter how hard I try. I want to feel stable and grounded, but borderline personality disorder keeps me from ever finding solid ground. With BPD, I feel like I'm constantly battling between wanting to connect and fearing I'll be rejected.